In honor of Women's History Month, welcome to the Women Leading Greater Good Wednesday series. My name is Dr. Angela Johnson, Managing Director of Alliance for Greater Works. And throughout the month of March, Alliance will be highlighting the achievements of 5 extraordinary and inspiring women through this educational series. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are still living through COVID, chaos, and conflict in our communities, in our nation, and in our world. This series is being conducted virtually, so you may hear some home or office noises in the background. We apologize now and ask that you bear with us as we all adjust to this new virtual world. As a 21-year-old nonprofit organization, Alliance has been developing leaders to uplift and transform communities so that all people have opportunities to thrive. And one of the ways that we do that is by developing women leaders and telling their stories. Today, we will be exploring the life of Patsy Mink, an inspiring lawyer, politician, and civil rights activist. We have prepared a short video with 5 lessons that we have gleaned from Congresswoman Mink's extraordinary life. This video will be followed by a panel discussion with our esteemed guest, the Honorable Rachel Proctor, the Mayor of DeSoto of Texas, and Jinya Wan, founder of Break Bread, Break Borders. We also have Mia Hernandez from the Alliance team serving as our tech for today. So we just thank you all for joining us, and let's take a look at that video.
What is gender and race equity? Gender and race equity are a set of actions, attitudes, and assumptions that provide opportunities regardless of a person's gender or race. And you know why both are important if you've ever been told, women or people of color just don't, or I don't think women or people of color should. Yeah, we can all fill in the blank. Egalitarians who fight for gender and race equity create more equitable communities because we all want to live in communities where we can be our best. Today, we will be introducing you to Congresswoman Patsy Mink, a lawyer, politician, civil rights activist, and first woman of color and Asian American elected to Congress. In honor of Women's History Month, welcome to the Women Leading Greater Good Wednesday series, an educational project of Alliance for Greater Works. Number 1, resilient leaders lift others. Born in Hawaii on December 6, 1927, Patsy Mink, a woman of Japanese descent, graduated from the University of Hawaii with a stellar academic record. After graduation, she applied to 20 medical schools and was denied entrance because she was a woman. So she attended law school at the University of Chicago. After graduating from law school in 1951 and passing the bar exam, no law firm would hire her because she was in an interracial marriage and she was a mother. Faced with the discrimination because of her gender as well as her race, Congresswoman Mink taught business law at the University of Hawaii and set up her own law practice. She quickly learned that instead of fighting laws in the courtroom, she needed to change the laws because resilient leaders lift others and know what it takes to change the world around them. Number 2, break with tradition and do not edit your desires. As a wife, mother, cultural and political warrior, Congresswoman Mink quickly broke with tradition and did not edit her desires because, in her own words, the country had to pay attention to gender equity as well as race equity. As the first Asian American woman to practice law in Hawaii, the first woman of color and first Asian American to win an election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1964, Congresswoman Mink participated in the passage of much of the 1960s civil rights legislation. Number 3, rewrite the rules if they are no longer relevant. Congresswoman Mink knew how to rewrite the rules, and she introduced and sponsored the first child care bill in legislation establishing bilingual education, student loans, special education, and Head Start. Staunchly committed to gender and race equity issues as well as healthcare, childcare, and education, she is most remembered for her co-authorship of Title IX, which was written with input from her good friend Dr. Donis Thompson, a professor and the first women's athletic director at the University of Hawaii. On June 23, 1972, Title IX was passed into law and was a game changer for women because it required all institutions of higher learning that received federal funding to provide equal spending on female and male students. Congresswoman Mink achieved a second victory in 1974 when the Women's Educational Equity Act was passed to promote gender equity in schools and increase educational and job opportunities for women. Both laws radically changed the career, educational, and collegiate sports world for U.S. women. Today, every woman who is enjoying her education, her job opportunities, and every girl who has a chance to play sports in school owes Congresswoman Mink a gratitude of thanks. Number 4, bring all of your experiences. Serving 12 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congresswoman Mink was fueled by her personal experiences as a Japanese American during World War II, as a woman of color, as a mother, and particularly as a woman in an interracial marriage during the 1950s. Throughout her career, Congresswoman Mink had no patience for injustice and intolerance and wanted to make sure other women and people of color did not go through the discrimination she had to endure. Number 5, we are entitled to ambition, and other ambitious women agree. On September 28, 2002, after a month-long hospitalization with viral pneumonia, Congresswoman Mink passed away. Her name remained on the November ballot, and she won re-election by a landslide. As a passionate go-getter, Congresswoman Mink's work is an example of what is possible. More importantly, Congresswoman Mink taught us that we are entitled to ambition. Ambition requires assertiveness and tenacity if we are to reach our goals. She never gave up, and other ambitious women agree. Never give up. Okay, leaders, we've come to the end of this session for this week, and because you stuck around, here's your bonus for staying with us until the end. Once you get in, it is your responsibility to help others gain access, because the world is waiting for you to be a vibrant, passionate, and effective voice for the principles you believe in. If you are a woman with a desire to lead, we invite you to join us in creating real change in our communities and in the world. Everything we have learned as corporate, nonprofit, and social enterprise leaders has been crafted into the Women's Executive Leadership Program. Go to alliancetx.org and enroll today. Use the promo code WELP$50 to waive the registration fee.
What an incredibly fierce and fascinating woman. Before we dive into this discussion, for those of you who have just joined us, I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest to you today, the Honorable Rachel Proctor. Mayor Proctor was elected as the 22nd mayor of the city of DeSoto, Texas in February of 2021. Prior to being elected to mayor, she served on the DeSoto City Council, and during her time on council, she served as the mayor pro tem from May 2016 until May 2019. Mayor Proctor is the owner and administrative director of the Neighborhood Christian Learning Center of Dallas, Inc., a learning center that has been owned and operated by her family for nearly 30 years. She is a two-time published author, mentor for emerging women entrepreneurs, and founder of the nonprofit Emerge Leadership, which provides young women graduating from high school with college scholarships. Madam Mayor, thank you for being with us today. We know you are a very busy person, so we appreciate your presence. Our next guest is Jinya Wan, a social impact, community development, and creative innovator. She is the founder of Break Bread, Break Borders, a social enterprise empowering refugee women economically through the storytelling of food and culture. She is also an author and acclaimed artist who is shown in galleries in Dallas, Miami, and New York. Her work examines her Asian identity and diasporic immigrant experience. Jinya is highly regarded for her ability to bring communities and people of all backgrounds together, and she is the proud member of the Orchid Giving Circle, a fund of the Texas Women's Foundation. So thank you, Jinya, for being with us today. And we want to thank our audience for being with us as we discuss the life and legacy of Congresswoman Patsy Mink. I would like for our discussion of Congresswoman Mink to be as organic as possible, so please feel free to comment, even ask questions of your own. But Madam Mayor, I'd like to start by congratulating you in the DeSoto High School girls basketball team with back-to-back state championships.
Hey.
We've seen you attend most, if not all, of their games, and many of those girls will go on to play at the collegiate level and hopefully the professional level. What does the passage of Title IX mean for girls and young women growing up in your city and in the United States?
Well, I first want to say just congratulations to them. Big shout out to them. They make our city so proud. And I tell them all the time, just, continue to walk into your greatness and just really embrace the blessings and the talents and the gifts that you have and really maximize those in this season of life. And that's so important. And the Lady Eagles, they have their motto for this past year has been, we're still hungry, meaning that they went into it with a champion's mindset that they were going to take this year as well. And so, but I would say to that though, winning two back-to-back, titles wasn't something that they took for granted would happen either. They tenaciously went after it one game at a time. As you mentioned, I was at most of the games. I traveled a lot with them. Actually, they went to play in Milwaukee, DC, a couple other places, and I actually went with them to those games. And so, but each and every time they went out there with that same mindset that of a champion, and they did it one game at a time, 1 week at a time. And even with a lot of the things they faced in terms of just even before COVID, like being racked with a lot of injuries and just a lot of setbacks and challenges that were happening at the time along with COVID. But in the end, their hard work really paid off in that aspect. Now, what I'll say to that, to your question, essentially, there are 7 seniors on that team, and all of them have been blessed to be recruited by Division I schools. And so, the passage of Title IX makes tremendous opportunities like that possible for young women. And when I think of Title IX, I just continue to think about the next level. And it's not, Title IX, of course, is not just specific to high school and to sports and things of that nature, but just the next level in general, and how, that the passage of that really broke that ceiling to allow them to walk into opportunities like that. And so what feels to us like the norm was only made possible because of the incredible work done by women like Congresswoman Mink.
Yes, and opportunities. I like how you describe it, opportunities to walk into the next. And so Jinya, as a social entrepreneur and founder of Break Bread, Break Borders, how powerful is Patsy Mink's story as a woman, as a mother, as an Asian American, as a professional? And how does her story empower multicultural women leaders like yourself? And as Mayor Proctor just said, opportunities for women to step into the next.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me here. This is such an honor to be in this space. And so, watching Patsy Mink really break all those ceilings of all sorts has been amazing because growing up in Taipei, Taiwan, my parents actually grew up in the south of Taiwan, and girls didn't have much access to education for success. And so my mother barely got to finish elementary school, let alone anything further. And so when having girls and my father losing his job and trying to figure out how to get the girls fed and to access education and all that, when my aunt and uncle called from America and said, they're starting a Chinese version of McDonald's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My parents said yes, and that's the thing. It's watching powerful women like Patsy step into power and reclaiming that space. My parents and my mom especially thought, if I didn't have access to this, what can I pave the way, watching other powerful women do this, to do more for our children, to build a better world for them to grow up in. And so, 16 franchises later, my parents ended up pinching their pennies to acquire one of the franchises here that was doing well in Dallas. They thought, oh, the kids have grown up in a nice town, and let's get them to a bigger city to go to better schools and to a metropolitan area that is more diverse and equitable and hopefully more inclusive. Every day I saw my mom teach people, other immigrants and refugees and migrants, to come and work in our kitchen and send them on to bigger and better opportunities, because our ancestors were people who escaped communism to take refuge in Taiwan. And they, my father grew up during the war having to ration eggs, soy sauce, rice, and growing up dodging shelling to go to school was forced education, that Japanese education, as Taiwan was a colony formerly called Formosa. And so hearing that trauma and understanding that girls deserve more, that was kind of how we decided to go forward with this. When my mom tried to raise us as tiny philanthropists, we didn't have money, but we had the time. And so going about to do this, when I lost her to cancer, I really wanted to do something to honor her legacy. And stepping into a social enterprise, building a food for good company, working with refugee women from war-torn countries, places that the Taliban wouldn't even let girls, or women go to school. And some of the cooks we work with don't even know how to read or write in their own language, and those things are so powerful to see and to dispel and to dismantle, right? And so typically they wouldn't have access to education. Typically they wouldn't have access to even step out of a house without an escort, a man escort. And and really stepping out of that normal, you're supposed to cook in the kitchen and have children and nothing else in your life, and being able to have a job and actually invest in their own families and also into the communities, that has been tremendous. And so having a role model like Patsy, even if we have to tune into C-SPAN to see that, because we didn't grow up having those kind of representation in Vogue or any other media, mass media, right? And so if we had to turn on the news to find inspiration, that was what we did. So
wow. And what a way to honor your mom's memory, as well as connect women to things outside, to food and culture, but outside of the home space, so that they can learn from other women and be empowered by other women. And I like that you said, we may have to watch on C-SPAN about Congresswoman Mink's life, but through this very short video, we've been given this glimpse into her life. And she started her professional life as a lawyer and as a professor, and that evolved into a career as a politician. She saw things in her community, she experienced things and wanted to address them, and she took action. And all of this is playing out against the backdrop of the civil rights era. So I want to ask this question to both of you, Mayor Proctor, as well as you, Jenya. How would you describe Congresswoman Mink, and what does her life and legacy mean to you as a politician? Mayor Proctor, as a social entrepreneur, both of you are social entrepreneurs and advocates for creating these opportunities for women and girls.
Sure, I'll jump in and take that question first. So I think, at the risk of sounding almost like a cliche, I look at Congresswoman Minks as truly a trailblazer, somebody who was a risk taker, because before her, there was relatively no examples of any women doing what she was doing at the time in that space. And so she was someone that truly saw adversity as an opportunity, and she faced a lot of challenges, just beginning, and you've mentioned that, with her education and her professional career, and just being a woman of color in an interracial marriage, and finally as a political figure. And so I look at the things, just kind of the pathway of her life, to look at how, no matter what she faced, how her resolve was fueled by that. And each opportunity, and with every difficulty, she created a better way for other people. And so while trailblazer doesn't even really feel like enough to describe her, I think that word comes the closest to how I really feel about her and how I look at her life. And I think for myself, in terms of how, looking at what she did for women and girls, how we're still talking about her and the things that she's done to this very day, and people are still benefiting from what she did. And one of the things that I look at is, I myself was a first generation college student. I didn't have any examples of that in my family or even just around me. So I spent a lot of time, I think, even in those first years of college and just being out of the house and on my own, I spent a lot of time just trying to figure things out. And so one of the things that I vowed when I got into a place to where I really felt like I was at a place to where now I have some things that, even though a lot of them I had to gain through making mistakes, I have some things that I can share with other people to be the person for someone else that I wish I would have had, and to create opportunities for other women and girls that I wish I would have had. And so that's one of the things that really fueled my passion for creating things like Emerge Leadership and my women's ministry lunch and Morsels and Mentorship and all of the things we do, to really just be what each other needs in terms of support, in terms of resources, in terms of just, even if that's just a shoulder to cry on, like whatever that other woman needs to help them, again, kind of going back to what I said initially, get to the next level. That's why I think it's, looking at women like Congresswoman Mix really shows me why it's so important, and why I really have a passion for that in the work that I do now.
Thank you. Jenya?
Absolutely. To piggyback on what Rachel just said, I think, having that role model and seeing what, yes, that trailblazer may not even be enough of a word, breaking all those ceilings so, others can climb up. And so as we get to the space and the platform of, being able to hone in our voice and really amplify our voices in that way, it's amazing to be able to share that with others, as to lift as we climb, and in that resilience, that hope that it does exist in this place, and to really lean into our sisterhood and think about interracial solidarity, and fighting the good fight and getting into good trouble together, like what that looks like, sounds like, and feels like, right? And I think that was the thing. It was really getting to the bottom of that. And I am trying to, see, there were so many things that it was amazing to watch an Asian American woman, step into her power in this place and claiming it, after rejection, when every door closed, she found another window that opened, and that was insane. and amazing that, I love that exactly what you said, Rachel, just, being able to turn that adversity into, something positive, and figuring out what that looks like, for the next generation. And as a mother, also as a single mother to a biracial child who is half Taiwanese and half Slovenian, making him understand that, it is utmost important to embrace your heritage, your culture, and, to understand where you come from and to learn your history. And so, what side you want to be on, just because we're in this space that people forget and want to erase us, and when they ask us to shrink, we have to expand. And letting the kids know that the next generation is going to inherit a brighter future. That's why we're doing this work. That's why we're investing in women. That's why we're investing in women of color, so there is that space to occupy, space to expand, and space to tell more stories. And that the personal stories are so important, because people don't know what hardship, what trauma, what, right, and the challenges that as a mother, as a woman of color, as a gender that constantly gets erased. It's probably going to take us 200 years to catch up on equal pay. Those are not things that we should still be talking about. And luckily, Congresswoman Patsy Mink, started those conversations and started to dismantle the system, started to, to unpack all that. So, so we could have a space to step into, and that in itself is incredibly powerful.
And we're so grateful to her that she did not give up. I mean, after 20 medical schools turn you down,
Right.
and that's really what you want to be when you grow up, is you want to be a doctor, and they just keep turning you down. And so you turn to the law. And she even said one time that I didn't start off wanting to be in politics. Not being able to get a job from anybody changed things. Unable to get a job, she goes on to co-author Title IX. She goes on to do all of these great things so that we can have equal opportunity today. So how do we keep her legacy alive? How do we ensure that women and girls from kindergarten all the way up to the collegiate level and beyond understand who she is and what she has done for us in terms of equal access to education, equal access to job opportunities, and the ability to even just play sports in school?
Well, I'll jump in there. And her statement about not wanting to get into politics resonates with me so deeply, because that's actually my story. I didn't come from a political family. My dad was a pastor, and he was eventually a businessman. And so we didn't talk about politics at all in our homes growing up as a ministry family. Like, Jesus was our president, as far as I knew, for a very long time. So, it's one of those things that it's kind of like, and I think destiny will leave you clues in terms of what you're supposed to do, right? I think that a lot of what I'm doing now was things that I was always doing. It just wasn't in the form of that. And I don't necessarily believe you have to even have a title or anything specifically to really affect change. We know there are so many women and so many history makers that didn't have a title at all, and they changed the entire course of history. However, I think for some types of change, you have to put yourself in a position to get a seat at the table so that your voice can be heard, and the things that you're advocating for can be supported. So I definitely resonate with her in terms of just kind of life circumstances pushing you in one area to really get you to where you're actually supposed to be, and you were created to be in that position. But I would say one of the things that became a common phrase, especially with some of the social injustice and the political turmoil that we experienced, specifically that came to a head in 2020 during rallies and marches, was say her name. Mm-hmm. And I think even it applies here by educating young women in very tangible ways, right? In terms of the contributions that she made, and just reminding them again that a lot of the things that I think, and I don't even think they intentionally take some of the opportunities that they have for granted. It's as simple as just not knowing who really paved the way for them to be able to step into some of the things that they enjoy today. But I think educating young women on who she was and the contributions that she made that have a direct impact on where they are now and their futures. We've got to make time, and we've got to be very intentional about weaving her story of her life into the fabric of our society as it relates to young women in their lives, and especially in pertaining to education and sports in particular.
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. And I think that one of the most beautiful things that I've heard from one of my amazing Latina friends who grew up in Mexico, she talks about how there's this old saying in Mexico that you can actually die twice in your lifetime. The
Wow.
first time is when your soul physically leaves your body, and the second time is when people stop talking about you. And we will never stop talking about my mother and her legacy, and Patsy Mink and her legacy, and all the great women, all our ancestors, all the giants, the shoulders that we stand on, right? And so I think, definitely that continuing to tell her stories, whether it's, watching the film Ahead of Majority, or Patsy's daughter, Wendy Mink, Gwendolyn Mink, actually has written a book called Fierce and Fearless. Patsy Takemoto Mink, first woman of color in Congress. And so that book actually just published this year. And so that we definitely have to run to the presses to, get that. And just, continuing to share those personal experiences that she went through, right? I mean, can you imagine if she actually just actually got a job somewhere and didn't have to fight for all that? Like we would have never had any of this, to talk about. And she talks about that, if had they just given me a seat, at medical school, or given me a job at the law firm, she's like, I would have been perfectly happy getting a paycheck. That's security, that's safety. It's super Asian, it's very Asian. That's we would all just love that. But that was not what happened. And it drew that fierce fire for her to go do something else, and to rewrite the rules and debunk tradition. And I am a complete accidental entrepreneur. After my parents' restaurants, I really, I was like, I've always wanted to be a creative, always loved art ever since I was 3 years old. All the other lessons, piano, ballet, totally did not stick. And so, when my parents were retiring, they said, hey, Virginia, do you want to run the restaurant? And all my sisters and I were like, no, slow motion, no. There's no way we want to ever smell like an egg roll ever again for the rest of our lives. But look at how fate brought us here. This is my calling, making art, sharing the storytelling, and, understanding the 360, the holistic woman, what the professional side is, what the personal side is, what those experiences are, and sharing my mother's, universal language of food, with people, and, understanding that it is such an incredible universal language and an equalizer, for people to sit down and be able to break bread together and break down borders at the same time, having those tough, courageous conversations, and having that safe space for women to share their stories. And so people understand what a refugee looks like. People understand what a woman has to go through. People understand what, it doesn't matter what faith you are, this is how we celebrate life. And, and how people understand that, women who actually are in this space invest. This is a UN study. Women will literally invest 90% of their income straight back into their families and into the communities, whereas
Yes.
men actually only invest about 35 to 40%. That's less than half. And so that statistics tells us that, when you invest in women and girls, this is what happens. And yet Patsy paved the way, to amplify that. And so we are, incredibly honored to be the recipient of such grace.
So say her name, have conversations, the hard conversations about who people are in their lives. I love those examples, but I want to talk about the fact that here we have this Congresswoman, which is not common in the 1960s. It's not common for a woman to even be in Congress. she served 24 years in Congress, y'all.
Right.
And she got these two major bills. Lots of bills passed, but two major bills. Why do you think she was such an effective and successful legislator? And how do we protect her legacy of being so tenacious to get these bills passed in this male-dominated space?
You know what? Being in this space, you are absolutely right. It's few and far and in between to see individuals with such longevity in this space. And it's not for the faint of heart, number one. So to be able to last and to be effective in any position for that amount of time and not get stale, as they say, is an incredible feat, as we even see with Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, who is retiring as of next year after spending over 30 years in District 30 here. And just even before that, just an incredible legacy. And she had a lot of firsts of her own. But I think it's very simple for me in terms of what I see is some of the reason why she has such a longevity there in Congress. And I'm just a person that likes to keep the fundamentals up front, right? And one of the things that I saw just kind of looking at her life and studying her life, I think she was so successful and so effective because at the core of every position she took, at the core of every piece of legislation she fought for, she was standing on what was right to do. It was just the right thing. Equality is just the right thing. Giving women equal rights is just the right thing to do. And so I think she stood on her convictions and she kept the focus of her work on things that improve the lives of others. And I think that there's an old saying that when you make things happen for others, good things will in turn happen for you. And I think that she was not self-serving, and it was shown by what she fought for. Everything she fought for, it wasn't turned inward, it was turned outward. How do we make things better for the next generation? And I think that with that, she was bold enough to, and she wasn't someone who conformed, as we saw in many areas of her life, like I said, from education to marriage to just whatever she did. She was not a conformist. She was not somebody who was afraid to kind of be out there by themselves. And in politics, that's absolutely a space that you have to get comfortable being in most of the time, because there are so many conflicting views. There are so many opposing views to everything. Everybody has an opinion on everything in politics. And so she was not somebody who was afraid to just simply stand on what was right to do. And I think that that was really what made her a very successful legislator and made her ultimately very effective. Hence the fact that we are still talking about the impact of her work today.
I like that. I like that. Go ahead, Jenya.
Yeah. I wanted to share that, I think she was such a people's leader. She represented her community so well. And, before she did anything, she definitely walked a mile in their shoes. And I remember, even when she started her own law firm, as she took on clients who were mostly women who couldn't get representation. In fact, the first payment that she received for such representation was a fish. And that in itself says a lot, right? I love what you said, Rachel, about, doing the right thing. My mom used to talk about that too. Just there are three rules that the golden rules that we live by growing up is, number one is always do the right thing. And number two is be a good neighbor. And, and number three is practice kindness, compassion every day. And Patsy always did that, and as she canvassed, when she, was trying to run for any position, she would canvass, the neighborhoods and knock on doors. And back then it wasn't a thing. People didn't understand, who is this knocking on my door and, sharing exactly who is this tiny little lady, talking to me about, all this, about, equal rights and speaking up for, civil rights and speaking up for women and speaking up for, for people who are marginalized, in the space. And that in itself was incredible. And she just, and when you hear it, whenever I'm feeling a little down and, and I need a little pick me up, you just play a little Patsy clip. She's so motivational, right? Just in her body language, that fervent, need to serve the people, to fight for what's right, and to do all that is good is incredible, and it gets you motivated to kind of like go do the next big thing. And I think all those things really translated to how she really provided that pathway to longevity for her career, and really just her authenticity as a woman, as a mother, as a lawyer, as a politician, as an activist, all those spaces that she when she first got elected, I think her daughter was 12 at the time. And
Yes.
looking at like, Wendy, I mean, can you imagine being 12 and seeing your mother step into power like this and saying, this is what you can have too? And and now she's writing and definitely saying her name and talking about feminism and politics, and and if you can't beat them, join them, rewriting the rules and the policies that make this a better, more equitable world. What that looks like. It has been really amazing to see how she passed that baton, and that's the thing. She never took like all the glory, and she was like really trying to amplify this for the future generations to come. That was amazing. Yeah.
And speaking of rewriting all the rules, here you have this woman who's been discriminated against because of her race, because of her gender, because she's a new mom or a mom, and because of who she chose to love and spend her life with. But with every adversity, she, makes it her mission that she's not going to apologize for who she is. She's going to bring all her experiences to the job of representing the people. And I'm just wondering, what can we learn from this lesson of bringing all of your experiences to the public?
There we go. I think what I really love about her life, and I just get very motivated thinking about all the things that she's done. But she really kind of gives this don't be afraid to live out loud vibe, and not be ashamed of who you are and what you choose to do with your life, or who you even choose to be with. And just to really live authentically, live your life with conviction, and let that be your guiding principle. And there's I say this all the time: playing it safe rarely ever changes things. So you've got to, again, not be afraid to get out there and be different, and to really push what you believe in, and really taking bold steps. Also not being afraid to do things differently. And those are the things that really leave the indelible marks on history. So I just love everything that she stood for. I love everything that she represents in terms of being a woman of color. And just not being afraid to be authentically who we are. I've even had that happen even when I first got into the political space. I wear my hair natural most of the time. And so I was wearing my hair natural at that time, and someone who I highly respected them, kind of came and tapped me on my shoulder. And I hadn't been in office, I don't think 3 or 4 months at the time. And they said, well, hey, wearing natural hair is offensive to voters. And I said, wow, and it took me aback, because first of all, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was already in office. People had already voted and proven that clearly my hair wasn't an issue. But being young and new and just kind of new to the space, so I actually ended up relaxing my hair. And I guess because I hadn't had a relaxer in so long, it sent my hair into shock, and my hair like broke off and just did all these weird things. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like, you know what, I will never. First of all, who gets to make the rules that say wearing your hair the way that it naturally grows out of your scalp is offensive to others? And so all of these things about, and that's a small example, but then again, it's a big thing, because again, it just says that I can step into these spaces exactly how I am, how God made me, how I was created to be. And in the way, like, there is no rules that say you have to look like this in order to be successful in this space. And when we step into, again, what Congresswoman Mink stood for, which was being authentically yourself and really just championing those things you're passionate about, it really gives you the grit and the resolve to be able to, when those types of things do happen, and they happen so much more, even when we see the things like just the passage of the Crown Act with hair discrimination. It's a huge thing. And so again, just doing those things that are right and allowing people the space and creating opportunities. If you are an agent of change and if you are in a position to affect change, creating opportunities for other people to be exactly who they are and to be able to step into those opportunities just like everybody else in that space is huge for me. And that's something that I've learned from observing her life from the outside.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm sorry that you experienced that and that happened to you in a way, but as you talk about it, I feel like I have permission now to say no.
Yes.
Who gives you permission to say what voters like and don't like, or what's
Mm.
offensive to
And
them
it
and
was
not
crazy
offensive
because
to
I'm like,
them?
wait a minute, I'm already in the seat.
I'm already here.
So I'm just like, oh my gosh. But you know, you live and you learn and you grow and you get stronger and you get wiser as a leader and how to really handle yourself in these spaces and not allow people to handle you any kind of way. And so I take it as definitely that, a lesson learned. Albeit a very hard lesson to have had to learn. My hair had to be sacrificed at that time, but definitely a lesson learned. And it just reinforces all of the work that women like Congresswoman Mink do each and every day to fight for just equal rights for women, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally I feel for you, and I hear you and I see you, and that's the thing. It's, relating on that note of being judged and being this monolith or stereotype that typically Asian women don't speak up. And typically I'm the only Asian American woman in the room, and how we're tokenized and stereotyped and all of the injustices that happen in between. Today actually marks the 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa shooting. And we sit here, we honor Women's History Month, and we honor the 6 Asian American women who were shot that day. And we really want to understand that this type of work is incredibly complex. It's challenging. A lot of it is not logical, it's emotional. And but helping people and educating people and really unpacking our history, that just like what Patsy Mink did, is really the way to go. And and watching her go through all this and hearing the stories, what Mayor Proctor went through, like, we should not be still having those conversations, but we
Right.
still are having those conversations. And but we have more people to have these conversations with now. There's a whole tribe of us of our sisters and brothers in the movement, right, having these conversations together and saying, well, we don't want to put up with that, and collectively how we can affect change, progress, and make that kind of impact going forward. That's what we've been seeing is that typically that gets something that gets swept under the rug is out in the broad daylight now. People are talking about it. People are saying, well, there's nothing right about any of that. How do we right the wrong? And it is definitely a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back sometimes. But I think what I really do want to embrace is the fact that we have all these people we love, like all y'all, doing this work in this space with us. And somehow it doesn't seem so rough. And sitting here in interracial solidarity and in this sisterhood and brotherhood, it feels like the movement can move forward, and thanks to Patsy that those things are possible.
So I have one more question for y'all. In what ways has Congresswoman Mink's story impacted your own leadership?
Wow. Since learning more about who she was and the work that she's done, again, and I think I mentioned this earlier, it really reminded me of some of the reasons why I have such a love for young women and for mentorship and things like that. I now know that, not as necessarily the first woman in my seat, but as the youngest person to ever serve in my role, that I'm forging a path for other young women to follow. And of course, much of what she did was met with opposition, yet it did not deter her. So I know that, for myself, as long as I keep doing what's right at the forefront of everything that I do and keep my intentions pure and keep the people that I serve at the forefront of everything, I can't allow myself to be derailed or discouraged by those who come against me, or policies or things that may not be in moving in the direction that I would like to see them go into. But just really seizing every opportunity to level the playing field and to make what's wrong right, and to make unequitable situations fair. That has really shown me, and again, it's really simple for me in terms of things that I take away from looking at her life. And I think we sometimes overcomplicate things in leadership because it has to sound big, it has to sound grand, but
Yes.
just keeping things really basic and just really doing what's right at the forefront of everything that you do is something that I'm definitely walking away with. So I definitely appreciate this opportunity to share on this panel today and to actually meet you, Jenya, and to be able to hear your story and just hear the things that you've shared. It's really inspired me. And so I thank you all for this opportunity and for definitely highlighting Congresswoman Mink for other women to be inspired by her as well.
Jenya, you get the last word there.
Thank you. So I think, how she has really changed my view or how I practice my leadership is definitely that I know that I don't have to stay in one lane. I know I can be a single mom and rock it. I know I can be an incredibly, impactful social artist, making art that, that is making change for the better, for the world. And I know I can run a social enterprise and empower other women from around the world. And I don't have to stay in one lane. And I love the fact that hearing her speak really makes me understand that when I got accepted to the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, when I give time to the Orchid Giving Circle, when I'm a part of an activist group called Women of Asian Descent, or as I recently got accepted to the Leadership Women Texas class, that I know that I am in a space to understand how to hone in my voice as a leader. And that I don't have to be the only Asian American woman in the space, that there are others, in the space to speak up with me. And that voice is powerful, and speaking of powerful, and what she's really taught me is really, all these are things that people have told me that it's things I'm good at, and it's all the genetics that I inherited from my amazing mother, Margaret Maying Huang. And she's always taught me that, like, understand what your superpowers are. And, and Patsy tells us, now that you know your superpowers, we'll use it for good. And, and I love being able to learn those lessons from her and further those amazing initiatives together.
Well, thank you, Mayor Proctor, and thank you, Jenya, for sharing with us today. And we also want to thank our viewers for spending your time with us today. And we learned a lot, not only about Congresswoman Mink, but also about ourselves and what we can do to give back to the next generation of women and girl leaders. So before I forget, if you have not subscribed to this series yet, for the audience, you are missing out. You need to go back and watch these videos and these panels discussions, and you can do that at alliancetx.org. Today's discussion will actually be loaded to the website by Thursday afternoon. And if you would like to learn more about Alliance for Greater Works, this series, or how we develop women leaders throughout the world, or if your company or organization is looking for a place to sponsor or develop multicultural women leaders, you can learn more on our website, alliancetx.org. And lastly, if you know of any aspiring women leaders looking for leadership development programming, please share our work with them. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion on Congresswoman Mink, and we will see you next week as we discuss the life and legacy of Emma Tenayuka, a labor leader, union organizer, and educator. Goodbye and blessings to you all.